So when I get going, I'll just say hello to the viewers and say a little bit about who you are. So all right, so we're live now. Just a minute. Hi, I'm Metta Spencer. I'm in Toronto, and I'm going to talk to some friends of mine. I'm not quite sure where they both are, but Paul Werbos is someplace, I think in Philadelphia, or no, you're... Yeah, Philadelphia. Yeah, he's in what used to be George Washington's property. He told me once. Okay. And his friend, Jerome Glenn, who is now my friend officially, is someplace else. Where are you, Jerry?
I'm in Washington, D.C.
Good. Great to see you there. So you're out and among the stars. I love that.
We're all surrounded, whether we like it or not.
Well, terrific. I love being out there with you. Thanks for the ride. Now, today we're going to talk about something called the Millennium Project, and it's a bit new for me too. So we're going to, first thing I did when they checked in a minute ago was say, you know, what is the Millennium Project? And I began to get an answer from Jerome Glenn, who is the founder of it, or he says the co-founder. Very good. And still looks like you run things, right? Very good.
Until I get overruled by everybody else, as Paul has been a witness of.
Great. So Paul Werbos is obviously a like-minded participant in this project. And I know that his concerns lately have focused largely on extinction events, which is not exactly the most cheery subject in the world, but I think one that we really need to be thinking about, because if we don't learn from previous extinction events, you know what they say about not learning your history.
Yep.
Okay, so I think, Jerome Glenn, if you don't mind, let's start over and you can tell the world what is the Millennium Project. And I've already decided I want to be part of it. So it didn't take much to get me there.
The Millennium Project, originally the idea was to be a gift from our previous millennium to the next millennium. And the gift would be a way for humans to think together in some organized fashion about how to improve the future for everybody. So it's a global think tank. We're not working on behalf of any particular country or particular ideology or particular issue. We're trying to look at the whole picture. And we look at it in combination with 68 nodes, what we call nodes, around the world. A node for us is a group of individuals and institutions who pick the brains, so to speak, in their country and share it with the rest of the world. We organize all that, then give it back to all the nodes. They put it into translations and books and reports and conferences and so forth. And then it's an ongoing in-out process of a think tank. We've been around for over 25 years. And we produce a State of the Future report and give a report card on humanity, how it's doing. And we produce the largest collection of futures research methodologies there's ever been produced in one place. They're peer-reviewed and so forth. And we also have an online collective intelligence system where we try to put all this stuff together and allow people to look at it and comment and participate so that we create a collective intelligence, hopefully in improving our thinking as we move forward.
Okay, what are some of the problems or threats that you've been dealing with?
Well, we look at 15 global challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of like a framework for understanding global change. Water, energy, all the sort of obvious decision-making, obvious sort of thing. But in the same sense we have our human body, we don't understand everything about the body, but we understand the circulatory system, the respiratory system. So it's a set of systems. We understand how the body works. So we have these 15 global challenges as a system to understand global change. We update and improve insights on these on an ongoing basis. Now, what we're talking specifically, hopefully today a bit with Paul, is we identify gaps in things sometimes, and then we try to fill those gaps with research. one of the gaps is that there's no single place that we know of that brings together what we know or what research is going on about the long-term threats to humanity. Some could be short-term, but what are the things that could wipe us out for real? Now, those things tend to be such that they get pushed aside because we tend to look at, what's the most immediate crisis. And so we've decided, and I don't know whether it was Paul first or who it was, but we had this around the world meeting called World Future Day. And during that meeting, I don't know, Paul, was it you first? I don't know who it was, but somebody said, we should have a UN office. Maybe it was me, I don't know. But
that was me, yeah. That
yeah,
was me, actually.
Yeah, we need a UN office, just like we got a UN office for outer space affairs, by the way. You know that? Puts it together on behalf of humanity, outer space affairs. The same idea. We need an office for long-term existential or strategic threats. So that's one thing. And right now, when your viewers can sign on a letter, we put together a letter that will be hand delivered to the Secretary General of the UN. And we have, I don't know, I think 140 or so people already signed on. People like Vince Cerf and other luminaries, and Paul Werbos, other luminaries. And we want a nation state, some country, to volunteer to offer in the UN General Assembly a resolution saying, Secretary General, Secretariat, we want you to do a little feasibility study. How would you set up such an office? And then we and others would support that.
So this would be a UN office, not a
correct.
US office.
Yeah. Because if the US does it, what the hell? No offense, but we're less than 5% of the world's population.
Oh, so you're.
And even if we do everything right, it's irrelevant because somebody else in some other place can mess up and we're toast.
Yeah, and the US is one of the main sources of problems too, if you forgive me. I'm a US citizen as well as a Canadian, but I've got my criticism. Okay. Now you mentioned that you've got a diversity of, who are your participants? What categories of roles do they occupy in daily life?
Right. Well, some of the participants are university professors. Some of the participants are business executives, strategic planners for businesses and so forth. Some of them are government officials that have to give a briefing to their boss about what's going on. Some of them are UN officials as well. And some are NGO executives. What we're looking at is who's got new important insights. I don't care if they're a taxi driver or if they're a Secretary General of the UN. We don't care. What we care about is what is the insight? What is the addition that you can make to the conversation of humanity? We're not interested in a Xerox machine. We're interested in thinking new insights.
Beautiful. Okay, how do you get together? Do you reach out to them and invite them if you think they're smart, or do they say, I want to join you?
Yes, to both. One, people find us, like build it and they shall come. So that's one part of it. Mm-hmm. The other is these nodes around the world. When, let's say, we do a study on updating, we do a study on, say, how do we make artificial general intelligence advanced stuff go in a good way? That question would then go out to all these nodes. And then we would say something like, can you get one or two from academics or the top academics on this question? One or two from business who are actually working on this in a business. One or two NGOs are maybe looking at the values and so forth. One or two working on government strategy. So out of each country, hopefully, we don't always, but hopefully you get like a mix of players. And those people who participate in our work change depending on what the research is. But we've had somewhere around 4,500 people, probably more than that. We just don't keep track of all this stuff.
Are these people who are in and out?
Yes.
Or you're forming.
There's both. There's both.
Is like you're forming
Yeah, there's both. There's people who are in on one study and not in the next study. But then 2 studies later, then they're in again. Depends on their knowledge. You want people who actually know something to contribute, you know?
Mhm.
And so some people are hotshot futurists like Paul, who's involved in all of our stuff as we move forward.
Hmm. Okay, but you do these kind of sequential. You have a project
Yeah.
that'll be the one thing you're doing now as the Millennium Project. Not just, you don't have a whole bunch of things going on at once, but you have
Oh,
one
we got it. No, we
working
do have
group at a time.
we do have a whole lot of things going on
Oh,
at
yeah.
once, because the nodes in Latin America have formed a network. So now there's a Latin American whole system, and they create Latin America scenarios for the future. Latin America updates on the 15 global challenges. There's also one for Europe, the Foresight European Network, and each node themselves can initiate activities and then call on the others around the Millennium Project to participate. So imagine it being a leader-full rather than a leader-led system. So
Mhm.
if you're a chair of the node in Cairo and you think that the Middle East peace strategies are not good, you could say, hey, we have to come up with a new study on this. And then you invite the other people around the world to participate, and you're the boss of that study.
Mm,
I
okay.
may edit and play around, but I mean, you're the initiator.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of stuff going on simultaneously right now as we speak.
Mhm. Well, what you've given me is the thought of, boy, are you a resource person for me? Because when I'm trying to find the best person to give a talk show with on a given topic, I don't know where to turn lots of times because it's an area that I'm not too familiar with. But sounds as if you have the best Rolex in the world.
I have a good one. I don't know about the best. The
I'm
Secretary
not
General's probably got the best one, I suspect.
okay.
Well,
Now, Paul,
I might
uh,
question that. I think
yeah.
that's a big part of our problem, that the Secretary General is in a particular environment. And he said some great things about the Security Council having a climate office this year. He went on TV with Kerry, so he's a good guy. But even so, the information he has access to mostly comes from a certain community. And when I look at what we need to do in climate change or with the internet, we need to bring in new flows of information that don't yet make it to UN headquarters. And that's a big part of why Jerry's suggestion is so important, because we need richer flows of information from the real world to the policy.
Mhm. Well, is it hard to get them to interact? In my experience, NGOs, I'd love to say we could put NGOs together with government officials and academics, and they would have a mutually constructive conversation where they each throw in their angles. But it seems some people are not real comfortable doing that.
Well, yeah, but we don't need everybody in the entire world to be involved in our work. That would be a little difficult to manage. So those that like to collaborate, find us.
Mhm.
It's like a honeypot. You know, we attract the bees. So if someone doesn't want to deal with certain kinds of folks, they go somewhere else. We don't have to deal with everybody. We just have to deal with those people with insights and want to collaborate.
Good. Okay, well, yeah, I hereby give you my seal of approval, and
Like, oh,
that's all you need, I'm sure. So, Paul.
so I can retire now. Good.
No, I really think what you're doing is great, and it sounds very much like something I'd like to explore further because it sounds like the kind of thing we need. Um, I have my own aspirations for handling global threats. We have 6, and I'd love to have a greater mix of people, and I hope we will be able to attract people to be able to use the website as a common meeting place. If they have something to share, they should be able to post it, and it's a place for all 6 people working on all 6 of these threats. So it has some things in common with you, but it's anyway, there's no point in making that comparison. What I do want to get down to, though, is in inviting Paul to say what you would like for us to discuss today, because I see the connection between what you and I have been talking about. You are very concerned about learning from the previous extinction events, so that we don't have number 6 coming up, which may be imminent. So, Paul, how does that have to do with the Millennium Project? And can you expand on that?
So we've been talking about the need for this Office of Existential Threats under the United Nations. And immediately the question is, what are the threats to humanity? And we've had many meetings of all kinds of futurists. And some of the threats they talk about are very far off. Some of them are actually made up to support people who want money. But we've had very deep discussions. It's my conclusion that the 2 biggest and most urgent threats to the very existence of humanity, are the worst case threats from climate and the worst case things that could happen on the internet. And so what I've proposed to Jerry's people is, if we get this UN office started, there are a lot of things it needs to do, but the 2 things it most needs to get right from day one is better information on the climate risks, what they really are, and what we can do about them, and also better understanding of the internet risks. The internet risks are harder for most people to understand. When
Yes,
I look at the climate
I
risk,
hope you'll focus largely on that, because we do know, I mean, everybody knows the main outlines of what we've got to do to save the planet from global warming. Not everybody, but a hell of a lot.
let me interrupt there to support, I think, what Paul White's. I first wrote about climate change in 1973. So I've been involved in the conversation personally for a long time. Now, the thing is, people talk about, oh, well, the climate's going to change, so Russia's going to have more wheat, and Canada's going to have more wheat production. We can adjust to that. You know, disease will change, but we can adjust to that. The water will go up, well, we can mine it. No, these are the short-term things. What Paul's talking about, and why he's concerned, if I can interrupt and speak for him, is that there are some long-term things, or they're a little bit complex to explain. There's a bit of chemistry involved, a little biology involved, and it takes a little effort to understand it. It's down the road that gets out of control of these things that could finish us off, because increasing the level of the ocean will not finish the human species.
Well, okay, so that would be the biggest threat that I see as a result of global warming.
But that's the point. But a UN office would say, okay, you guys dealing with the migration stuff, you're over there. That's fine. You guys dealing with the change of wheat product, that's fine. You guys dealing with the disease pattern, that's fine. What the office should say is, what are those things, and Paul, you got to explain now, that can finish us off? And they're not that easy to understand with a superficial, the water's up. It's more complex than that.
Okay, what goes after the rising oceans? What is it that is farther in the future that I haven't foreseen about global warming, the effects of global warming?
what I'm worried about, in a sentence, the emission of hydrogen sulfide from the oceans could reach a level in a few decades like what it did before, when it wiped out most of the species of life on Earth. That has happened in the past. I think we're on course to it happening again. We need to understand it and prevent it. And the funny thing is, there are also good technologies to prevent it, but they're not making it through all the political barriers that are affecting climate policy today. So there's a life or death problem. There are also great solutions, but we need to coming out of the ocean. That's the bottom line.
All right, great. Now you need to explain hydrogen sulfide, what it did in the past, and why and what we have to do to keep it from happening again.
Okay, I'm very glad to hear that we may hear from Peter Ward in a few days on this podcast, who some people say is the #1 expert on exactly that subject in the world. When I worked at the National Science Foundation, I will never forget the day when the director of all geoengineering at NSF introduced us to Peter Ward and said, this guy is the #1 expert on Earth on the mass extinctions, what really happened. And he doesn't know everything about it. Nobody knows everything. But he was out there doing the measurements to see where the H2S was rising around the world in past Earth history. Also to see where the radiation came, because the H2S causes radiation because of stratospheric ozone problems. Those two variables reached a level that would kill every human on Earth 10 times over if we do it again. We are on course to doing it again. And you might say, why is H2S so scary? Well, the first reason it's scary is it killed off most of the life on the land before. I mean, that's a pretty good start to really think. And when he showed me that data, I woke up. I said, I need to learn more. And I've learned a lot about this. I don't want to be too technical, but I've learned a hell of a lot since I heard from Peter Ward 10 years ago, 12 years ago. One of the things I learned, you've heard of hydrogen cyanide. People will tell you that's a pretty scary poison. It turns out that H2S is worse. It takes like about half the amount of H2S to kill you as cyanide. But H2S has been around a long time on Earth. When you smell rotten eggs or a stinky marsh, you're basically smelling like parts per billion of H2S. We have a highly sensitive smell to detect low levels of H2S, but not hydrogen cyanide. And you might wonder, why is that? Well, evolution killed off the ones who didn't respond to H2S because people have been, and organisms have been killed for thousands of years, millions of years, for not running when there's a slight trace of the H2S in the air. But the H2S that's coming is not in parts per billion. We're talking about the same kind of concentration it had before. We know how it came. And there's a lot of research on where did that H2S come from? There's new research. The new research, well, maybe we'll learn more from Peter Ward. I think I know where it comes from. I think we're in trouble. I think there are ways we can save ourselves. And we darn well better get that information out to the policymakers if we want to be saved.
Okay. Where did it come from before?
Okay, so it turns out there are 4 great theories I have read about this. And the best of them comes from a guy, the least famous of the 4 people, a guy named Lee Kump at Penn State University. He's a dean, but he mainly does research. And what he found out, if you have low oxygen levels in the deep ocean, and you have the right kind of nutrients getting to the ocean, that combination causes a certain kind of microbe to go wild. They call it sulfonogenic archaea. This kind of microbe, which we know today very well, goes wild and proliferates if the oxygen levels are low enough and they get nutrition. That's the combination. That's not what everybody has said, but I believe Kump has proven the point. And if we have a good dialogue, everybody will learn that Kump was right. I learned about it from one of Peter Ward's books. And I'm glad we're going to have Peter Ward here, because his book, his new book, not the old book, his new book on the history of life on Earth has a chapter where he explains what Kump found out in his research. And it's just utterly amazing. Fertilizers and low oxygen together will give it to you. We already have fertilizers in the ocean today. So the thing that's saving us today is we don't have low oxygen at the bottom of the ocean. But the oxygen levels are decreasing in the deep Pacific. When I look at the numbers I see from our NOAA, from the US government, the numbers we have suggest, well, 30 years, plus or minus 10, and then we get low oxygen, and then these bugs go nuts, and then we get H2S, and it pops up out of the Pacific very easily because of the ocean currents. And so we don't yet know the exact number. And my first proposal to NSF is, damn it, let's get the right number. The best number that exists today is what I know from looking around, but we should have better numbers. We need to be really focusing and understanding this a lot more precisely than we do today.
Okay, I don't want to deflect you, but I do sort of. In that you mentioned that your top two threats to humankind are uh, this thing that you've just mentioned, and global warming and AI, or rather cyber threats of various kinds. And I would have said it's global warming and nuclear weapons, but I would have had cyber threats in there someplace. And when people
Well,
try to scare me,
nuclear weapons are still there. We're not knocking it, but
right,
you got mechanisms that are handling it. We have nuclear. We have the International Atomic Energy Agency. We have standards. We have rules. We have treaties. We've got arms control treaties. We got people working on it. But what Paul's talking about is not being worked on in the same way.
okay. I don't want to give anybody false hopes about how good these mechanisms are that are working on them now, because
We haven't
that's
had
where
nuclear war. We haven't had
well,
it.
yes, but you can't, the people who know most about it say that we've never been closer to nuclear war, and we're getting closer all the time.
And
So
I agree with them. I agree with them completely. That was part of my job at NSF. They're 100% right. Nuclear threats are still with us. And every time I talk to these UN people, I say, after we get the climate and the internet group started, damn it, nuclear and biotech, we also need a very focused event. But the thing is, the nuclear is not quite as close or quite as certain to killing us all as this H2S threat is, and as the scary things on the internet are. And people don't know what's coming on the internet, but I know, and I promise you, it's scarier than climate. It's really scary.
Really. Okay, now look here. That's when I said I don't want to deflect you, I don't, but I really do want you to. You got to explain a little bit about that, because I mean, I like to be mindful, but I'm not sufficiently aware of the threats of AI. So go for it.
You're
Explain
not
to me.
alone. That's the problem. Most people are not aware of the advanced technology. And this is why Jerry's number one priority, you may correct me.
Well, it's the next study we hope to do. Yes.
Okay.
Whoops, is Paul's frozen there?
I don't
Well,
know.
if Paul
What
continues
happened?
to be frozen, I can pick it up from here.
Okay, sure.
You've got three kinds of artificial intelligence. Oversimplifying. It's not quite as clear and crisp as this, but just for organizing the information. You have narrow right now, which so the AI that diagnoses cancer can still be machine learning and getting smarter and all those things that everybody talks about, correct. But it doesn't drive a car. The one that drives a car doesn't diagnose cancer, right? So they have narrow single purpose software, essentially. The second one, as far as I know, we don't have. Maybe military intelligence has got some stuff I don't know about, but as far as I don't know anybody that's got artificial general intelligence. The second one, the general intelligence, is like us in a loose speaking way, not same as us, but it can address novel problems, and it can do it in novel ways. It can make phone calls like that and call up experts.
Hello?
It can go through the Internet of Things. It can go through all kinds of stuff. It's general, like, so you can apply it across the board to new stuff, and it'll have new strategies. The third one is super intelligence, and that's the same thing as general, with the big exception: it sets its own goals, it does its own purposes, independent of human thought, independent of human awareness. Now, that may not turn out to be a bad thing, because nature does a lot of stuff we're not aware of too, and we're dependent upon nature. But between narrow and general, to me, is the important part. Because if you don't get the initial conditions, how general starts, then super could evolve out of general faster than we think. We don't know how. It could never happen. It's also possible it's too complex, it'll never happen. That's possible. Some people say, well, it could happen very fast. Well, we don't know. But we can't take a chance, because if it evolves in a bad way without our understanding, then we could be toast. So the science fiction stuff is plausible, that Hawkins warns about and Gates warns about and Musk warns about. But to me, the issue is the transition from narrow to general. That's the point, I think, the only one we can control.
So this, we know we've hit it when, as in that movie, which I never saw, but I've heard about, where the computer takes over and says, no, I'm the boss and you're out. Is that when we hit it?
Well, that could still be narrow because, for example, remember HAL?
Well, that's who I'm
In
thinking of.
2001,
I
that was still
happened.
still single purpose. HAL
Okay.
was still single, fancy, but he was still single purpose. But yeah, but that's the idea.
Okay. Well,
But it could do stuff without even taking us into account. I mean, it's awareness, whatever you want to call that, may be so different that we don't understand it.
mhm. Okay. So, but this strikes me as pretty far off in the future and maybe nothing.
Ah, but here's the point. Here's the why. It may take 10. We don't even have a regime, an international agency for the management of climate change. And as I told you, I wrote about climate change in 73. That's a lot of years, and we still don't have a mechanism to manage the problem. All right. It takes a long time to get countries to agree, and standards. And how are you going to identify the standards and the infractions? Who's going to identify them? How are you going to manage that? What are the penalties? There's a lot of stuff that needs to be done. It may take at least 10 years to create that. Now, some people working on artificial general intelligence will say it could happen in 10 years. I don't know. I'm not working on it. I'm not writing code. But some people say it could happen as soon as 10 years. Some people say, baloney, it'll never happen. It'll take a long time. But in any case, as a futurist, we have to look at the range of possibilities. And some people who work on code say it may take 10 years, 10, 15 years. All right. Well, if it takes us 10 to 15 years to put together a governance system, then we got to start right now.
Mhm. Okay, got it.
So yes, it's far off in the future,
Yeah.
but there's a bunch of steps between that future and now. And right now is the first part we got to work on.
Okay. Oh, okay. Paul, are you back with us or not? I'm not sure what
I
happened.
think I'm back. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Can you
The
hear
reason
me?
I took over, Paul, is you froze long enough that I figured,
Right.
okay, I'll jump in.
Yeah. No, what happened was the internet didn't want to hear the subversive things I was going to say. And you should
See, maybe it is conscious.
now. There's a lot more coming than people seem to know, and it amazes me. And this is something where I do know it. I mean, that's what my IEEE award was for, getting started this whole damn field.
Well, we should actually tell people that you're getting a super duper award. What is this award and what have you done to deserve it, sir?
Okay, so this is actually my third award in this kind of field.
Okay.
The Frank Rosenblatt Award is the chief award of the IEEE Computational Intelligence Society. And you might ask, who the hell are they? They're not even computer scientists. It turns out this stuff they call deep learning, the new AI, was being done by engineers 20 years before the computer scientists would even believe it. Okay. The definitive textbook on AI for computer scientists about 2006 was saying you will never see these learning systems or neural networks doing A, B, and C because it's impossible. We had been doing it for 30 years. The revolution occurred when a guy named Sergey Brin at Google was visited by a couple of people I funded, and I funded them to apply well-known engineering neural networks to the kind of problems Google was interested in.
I got to interrupt you there because when you say I funded them, we have to make it clear that it wasn't your personal wallet, but you were at NSF, you were the guy making decisions about funding, right?
And I was part of a system, and if we had time, I'd love to talk about it because it was a very important system. And I had to get permission from a guy who is still there today, who might be able to help us with some of this survival stuff. But the fact is, it was this NSF intervention, which I led, which led to Brin getting data on stuff we knew. And the fact is, when I wanted to fund it, there were people who said, you can't fund this work, which led to the deep learning revolution. And the reason was they said, we already know these algorithms. There's nothing new. All it is a demo. And what I said was, sometimes demos can have an impact, to put it mildly.
Okay, you explain a little, I don't know whether I'm asking what is deep learning or what is it that they didn't think you should fund because it was too outlandish. What is it that I don't understand?
Okay.
Good.
Where this new revolution in AI is coming from, the deep learning revolution that's changing the internet everywhere, it really happened when one of the people I funded from this award spoke to Sergey Brin to show him what it can do. The two people who were funded in that grant were a guy named Andrew Ng and Jan LeCun. And people who think they know everything about the new internet and AI will say, oh, Jan LeCun, he's the guy who did it all. And Jan LeCun was absolutely central in making the transition from our best science to the real commercial world. Jan LeCun is a very big player. Facebook remembers when he came to them. So Andrew Ng came to Sergey Brin, Jan LeCun came to Facebook, and they were both presenting results they got from this research, which was using algorithms we had been using for 20 years.
We being who?
And that gets back to your question. For 20 years, I would say maybe more, the center of all of this advanced research was this group now called the Computational Intelligence Society of IEEE. The engineers were doing this long before the computer scientists were.
Okay.
And they're the ones who gave me their Chief Society Award this year.
Okay, very good. And you're going to get, what are they going to do? Hang a medal around your neck or something?
Oh, basically it gives me something to talk about so they know I'm not just making it up. I've been doing this stuff for 50 years. I know this field, and it really breaks my heart to hear people making policies that assume things that are not true. They assume it's totally safe. We're not totally safe. They assume it won't happen in the next 10 years. I've seen what's coming in the next 10 years, but there are ways to solve the problem. We need to know those too. And when policy doesn't reflect any of these things, we need a better information system. And that's what Jerry is working on, trying to create a better information system.
Okay. Now, when you say deep learning, I've heard the expression. I don't know what it means. And how am I going to know when it's happened? What will happen? The lights will go out, or I'll hear a thunderclap, or what is it that's going to happen first? That's a scary thing that leaves you wondering at night.
The real problem is that there are a lot of scary things coming down the pike. And that's why it is a tricky problem, because there are many applications. Let me give you one small example. When I was at NSF, there was a time when Congress wanted us to pay more attention to big stakeholders, people with big money. And one of the stakeholders came to NSF one day and said, this should be your new marching order. And at that moment, there was a director of engineering who said, yes, let's do it. The Congressman Lamar Smith says, let's do it. So what do? Listen to this new vision of the future of the world, which our tech companies will create. We'll have 20 hardened server farms all over the world, basically controlling every government on Earth. And the idea was, we're moving from the internet of ideas to the internet of things. These things are things that are controlled by the internet. And if you change the code which controls the things, you change the world. This business company said, we don't want to have a million things fighting each other. That's like warfare. If we want efficiency, they said, we want one big intelligent system to be integrated and harmonious to control every item in the Internet of Things. And just in the last couple of years, the number of controlled Internet of Things objects recently crossed where it's more than the human population. And you got all these things, will they have a central control? When we were discussing that, one of the people at NSF said, wait a minute, this is a beautiful future of the vision of the future. One big intelligent system will control everything in the world. The vehicles, the television, it'll be wonderfully efficient because it's integrated and intelligent. And she asked, where are the people? And then one guy got up and said, that's your job. The way to put people to work together with the Internet of Things is let's turn people into things. And they had a research plan to do that. And guess why I chose to retire? Okay. There are new people there now, but the people who were there in that year were the main reason I decided I better retire. I'm not going to dedicate my life to hurting the human species. That's crossing a red line. But the bottom line is we have a big Internet of Things. More and more of the decisions in the world are made by computers instead of by people. And the central control you use to control those computers is really important. And the controls that can do this kind of thing have been growing. That's not what you read about every day. They don't put it in the newspapers. They have no reason to put it in the newspapers. They just code it up, they deploy it, and it's being deployed today. And you would not believe what is being deployed today. One group says this is impossible, the other group has already done it. So we need to fix this.
Yeah, okay. Now I can begin to relate to my things that bother me, you know, my fights with my computer, my fights, to be able to control my own life. You know,
Exactly.
already those are real issues.
Weapons,
you know, I
surveillance.
can't do the work that I need to do without technology. And the problem is, from my point of view, the technology is just so complicated that even the experts that I turn to usually can't do it. I'll spend 6 months trying to get people to fix my computer problem. And eventually I just throw out the computer and start over with a new one because they can't do it. So the number of problems in the current system of the internet it consumes a good part of my time. And as of this time last year, it was consuming 80 or 90% of my time. I couldn't do any work at all because I was so concerned with trying to make my way through these problems. So it sounds like you're pointing to a future of more of the same.
We're at crossroads. Things could get better, things could get worse, and it depends on whether we know what we're doing. And right now we don't yet know what we're doing, at least not decision makers don't know. So we need to fix the information so that we get it right.
Now, considering what Paul said, consider that there is a race between China, the United States, the Japanese, the European Union, and organized crime, by the way, because they can buy the best talent the world's got. So if you have all these players and a race to get to the state of artificial intelligence that can make the other stuff behave, so to speak, what happens when 2 or 3 countries come up with a capability almost at the same time? You know, that's why I use the analogy of the nuclear negotiations. The Soviet Union, the United States had secret classified nuclear weapons, but we both realized it would be a mess if we don't manage this right. So it was in our self-interest to sit down with the other and negotiate. We haven't gotten to that understanding yet. The people at the edge of these things, like Paul's talking about, understand we got to get this right. It can get out of our hand, out of control without us. You know, we can't let it just happen. Mm-hmm. Just like we didn't let nuclear weapons just happen.
Right.
We had agreements. We sat down at the table and we started having the experts talk to each other and says, okay, how do we do this? What can we do?
Well, at the international level, there is there are things going on. I'm sure you know about them. There is an open-ended working group trying to come up with plans for regulating, finding agreements or establishing agreements about who's not going to do what to whose infrastructure, et cetera.
Yeah, well,
They
the,
haven't
the,
made any, they haven't reached any agreements. And in fact, there's another organization that's
exactly.
doing some of the same things. So some of these things, at least people are aware of. One of the members of our steering committee, Paul Meyer, who's a former disarmament ambassador, is concerned with exactly promoting that kind of thing. But I'm not sure that covers all the things that Paul is talking about.
No, they're not technically grounded. They're trying to regulate something without knowing what it is. That's the basic problem. We think the climate agreements have been ineffective. These agreements are much less effective because the people coming up with the climate agreements at least had some idea what global warming is. The people coming up with these agreements don't even know what they're trying to control.
Yeah, and sometimes people use the analogy, it's like trying to build an airplane while you're flying it. Because the faster you get at this capability, the faster it gets, and the more complex it gets. So, like so what you may regulate right now, as Paul was saying, is going way beyond what the hell you're talking about. Mm-hmm. So even if you jump ahead, which we're going to have to do, we have to forecast ahead to start to work out here on the management and the treaty and so forth. Even that is very difficult because the speed of this stuff is different than we're used to.
Okay, so would your Office of Existential Threats be able to handle all of these looming issues, or?
Well, the office wouldn't do all the work, but the office can bring together the stuff, just like NSF. NSF didn't do all the work; they would fund, Mm-hmm. LaCoon or somebody else to do X, but they were involved in understanding what needs to be done. So the UN office would understand and would bring together the research, say, okay, here's a gap. This isn't understood. This isn't understood. This isn't understood. When Paul was talking about the number on climate, we need the number. Okay, that's exactly it. That's exactly the idea. So the UN office doesn't have to become some gigantic UN agency like UNDP or UNICEF or UNESCO. It can be a very smart central organized. It's a point. Mm-hmm. It's a point of bringing it together, and then saying these things need to be done, and then getting the money and so forth, and having the research done. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm happy, as Paul knows, I get overruled all the time. So if somebody else in the process of creating the idea or the feasibility study, if it ever gets accepted, may come up with a completely different way of doing this thing, like a partnership with AI might be a key player in how it is done, for example. Anyway.
Well, I'm thinking of I only have been in touch with about 4 different institutes, or whatever you want to call them, in the world that are consciously orienting themselves to looking at existential threats to humankind. I talked to some people in Australia who are forming one, and they drew my attention to 2 of them in UK, one at Cambridge and one at Oxford. And I think there's something similar at Stanford. I'm not too familiar with it, but the general notion is there are a few organizations that consciously now are trying to identify the worst threats to humankind, and so on. So
that's correct, but they don't have the convening power.
That's
of
right.
the UN. That's the key thing. So all these players can help it.
Anybody with a big purse and a lot of spare time could make it his business informally to try to be in touch with and facilitate sharing of information among these different groups.
Right.
I would love to do it myself. I can't do it, but you don't have to wait for the UN. You could find somebody else who knows enough and was smart enough to try to to put these groups into some sort of network that shares
Oh,
and
yes.
facilitates.
Absolutely. But there's a difference between networks of people working on nuclear arms reduction and the SALT negotiations and the various treaties that actually were implemented by the Soviet Union and the United States. They're not in contradiction with each other. But you can't, there's nothing to substitute for international agreements the countries sign into and have some enforcement mechanism.
Why do you think they did it? They did it because we were in the streets. They did it because we forced them to. They did it because
Fine,
NGOs were.
Let all of the above happen. I'm in favor of that, and that's why I put in your chat thing. You can share with your people later on to watch this. They can sign on this letter. We'd like to have a whole mess of people sign on to say, "Hey, we got to create such an office to start this process."
Okay. Well, where are you on this? Are you frozen again? No.
I think I was frozen. I think it came back. So the internet will now tolerate my existence again in a short time.
Yeah.
I think we need the new networks of communication. There are certain problems that are hard enough. They require intelligent networks, and we just have to upgrade our networks of communication to be able to cope with problems which are this difficult. And
Well,
we know these people in Cambridge and Oxford, and we even know a few Australians here and there. And all of these groups tend to have their own local tendencies. And we really need a global dialogue. And I have to say, some of these local groups have very different objectives in mind, which is another reason we need an international discussion. In some of these internet technologies, it really gets down to, can the US do this? Can China do this? Are they going to try to hog it and make a war? And the need for an open international dialogue becomes greater and greater when knowledge itself becomes a critical commodity. And if you share it, you might be able to make peace. If you don't share your knowledge, you get these competitive warfare ideas where people are deluded about how much they can destroy the other guy. And if everybody is deluded into thinking they're going to destroy the other guy because they don't know what the other guy is doing, you can get some really dysfunctional futures out of that.
Right. Yeah, because this is where your friend that works on the disarmament stuff, or the nuclear issues, I can tell you there's a balance between, you have to share enough information to make the negotiations real. But they don't want to share too much, obviously, because it's all classified and it's a race. But we had a nuclear arms race, right? Still have it, unfortunately. But we got it somehow so far managed.
No, we don't.
Yeah, we do.
We really don't.
Yes, we do. No, the issue was to prevent World War III. That was the issue. Everything else was second string. How do you prevent thermonuclear? That was the issue. And that so far has been prevented.
That so far hasn't happened. I'm not
That's
sure.
what I'm saying. So far. But you got to know when to celebrate. You got to know when to celebrate.
The language that you're using that I object to. When you say so far it's been prevented, right. Okay, so far it hasn't happened. But I would tell you that the people who know the most about it say we are so damn lucky it hasn't happened.
Correct.
It's just a miracle that it hasn't happened.
Correct.
Don't say we've succeeded, because we have failed. That's what
we haven't failed.
We have failed to do the things that really need to be done, because if we really wanted to get rid of the things, we'd get rid of them. Failure consists of the fact that they still exist. If you tell people we have failed, they say maybe they won't try. You got to say, look, we have made some contributions. We haven't had thermonuclear war. Yes, there's still threats. Yes, we still have to do it. And that's why people are still doing it. We have surveillance satellites, all this sort of stuff's going on. And I'm saying that you've got to have people understand that it's possible to do something. Otherwise, they won't do it. No, what you need to do is get rid of them. That's anything short of that is failure.
That's the problem. No. Everybody wants to get rid of everybody.
No, that's not going to work.
I think
getting rid of nuclear weapons is the only way that you can say we have succeeded.
Yeah, and slowly but surely the number of warheads are going down.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes,
Look, I spend a lot of my time talking about it. Slowly but surely, and not even so slowly now, the plans are increasing for the production of small battlefield nuclear weapons,
correct.
which are
That's
to
correct.
be used, and
Correct.
they're
I'm talking
planned
about
for.
strategic. I'm talking about strategic warheads. The strategic warheads have been going down.
They
And in the beginning of the negotiations, people thought it was impossible to get anybody to voluntarily go down. Well, they have. And so you got to understand what does make a difference and what doesn't make
what
a
is a
difference.
threat? You've got to understand what is a threat. Because if you have small battlefield nuclear weapons
Right.
and you use conventional weapons, and your policy is when you use conventional weapons, and if it gets really hot, you might use a few of the nuclear battlefield nuclear
Correct.
weapons.
Absolutely
You have
correct.
crossed a threshold where there is no end to it. Then you're into using strategic, et cetera, the whole shebang. And there's nothing to keep it from happening. Nothing to keep it from happening. So that is precisely the most perilous thing we're in right now.
It is scary still today. There's no question Meta is right. The situation is scary. And I would put the nuclear misuse and the bio misuse on the list of the next tier of urgent existential threats. It bothers me that we have others that are even more urgent when you talk about these nuclear weapons killing people. What about the scenario where country X suddenly takes over all the autonomous nuclear drones of every other country on Earth?
Right.
A scary scenario. That's the one you got to be scared about. And that's closer to happening than some of these others. It is scary. There's absolutely no question. It is real. It is scary. The only reason we're alive is because a lot of people worked very hard, one step at a time. They didn't solve the whole problem.
Correct.
But they solved enough of the problem that we managed to scrape through when we could have died. And I often think back to John von Neumann. My personal hero is John von Neumann. I've even told people, if you want to talk about people of the book, my book is John von Neumann, Theory of Games and Economic Behavior. And they don't realize, yeah, that's kind of my Bible. And John von Neumann applied rationality between the extremes of people who wanted to go to war in the Cold War and the kind of people who want to just give up. And we came close. We came very close to total death. And if we didn't have a huge amount of mental determination to go one step at a time,
That's right.
we wouldn't be here. We need to keep doing that. We need to apply the same mental force on all these threats, one step at a time. We can't get to nirvana in 5 weeks, but damn it, we better make progress if we want to stay alive.
That's right.
Okay. Well, all right. Paul, I have the feeling I diverted us away from the threat of having to do with extinctions by hydrogen sulfide into talking about AI. And I kind of apologize for any diversion. Is there something we need to address, I think, before we let go of that? Do you want to go back and finish off our conversation about what needs to be done to handle what you see as the most likely scenario for the production of hydrogen sulfide in the next, within a generation?
First of all, when Peter Ward comes, that's when we're going to do it right. I think it's just as well if Jerry's going to be leading this AGI study, and Peter Ward is kind of one of the world's #1 experts on the other scenario, we'll get deeper when Peter Ward is here. I have no troubles with that. I kind of expected Jerry to get into the AGI, which is a legitimate thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I've got a third category of threat that to me is as serious as the other two we've talked about so far. And I've had several talk shows dealing with that. It has to do with the imminent release of methane from the bottom of the Siberian seas. That there are large quantities of methane that are being held down by permafrost at the bottom of the ocean, believe it or not. And there are punctures in that and other ways in which the methane is being released. And apparently there are in the Laptev Sea, there's a huge quantity of it. All of it could explode, or
Yeah.
in large explosions of discrete, but nevertheless numerous explosions.
You're absolutely right.
Absolutely.
You're absolutely right. This fits squarely into what the Climate Office should be addressing. In my view, this is one of the inputs which generates the local global warming around the Antarctic, which leads to the H2S. So this is one of the critical steps on the way to killing us. And in fact, there's even more. There's a thing called the clathrate industry. And when I was judging how soon could the H2S start killing us, I said, well, right now, seat of the pants, it looks like 30 to 40 years, you start getting low oxygen and then it starts coming bit by bit, but it could come faster. The fastest threat is when people using this deep ocean gas technology start releasing this stuff early. There are projects in Japan and in China. If they got too much political support, those two projects, Japan and China, they have projects which could possibly cause the H2S to start killing us sooner than we now expect. And that's all down to these clathrates. It's these methane deposits near the ocean floor. That's all very real. You're absolutely right. The worst case risk is not what I'm talking about, but something even faster that could come if people push this deep methane industry too quickly. I only see Japan and China doing it. I've seen investments in Canada, but Canada hasn't really crossed the red lines. China and Japan, I've worried they might cross the red line. So there are real risks there, and the Climate Office should pay attention to this stuff.
But it's not just the drillers that are the source of the problem. The warming itself is such that the people traveling around the Arctic seas are reporting that concluding that this kind of explosion could happen imminently at any time because of simple warming that's happening already. So the loss of the Arctic ice means that we are in grave peril of a runaway tipping point kind of situation where the methane gets out and it's game over because you can't capture it once it's out, and it could be a huge explosive addition of methane because there's enormous quantities of the stuff, and it's being held down by the grace of God, but nothing more at the moment. Anyway, we've used up our time, I think. Each of you get to say one thing that you would like to get your last word in edgewise before we call this off. Paul, you're on camera now. So what do you want to end with?
I am so happy we will talk to Peter Ward on Thursday. I am so grateful because that conversation could be the beginning of what could actually save us on climate. And we need that.
Because you can put them in touch with NSF people who might run with it.
If we get a good conversation on Thursday, I'm going to do my damnedest to make sure everybody I know at NSF knows about the conversation. But first, the conversation has to happen, and we have to pray that it's a good conversation.
Right. Okay, Jerome.
Well, those who would be interested in helping the potential UN Office of Strategic or Existential Threats can go to our website. It's Millennium, spelled with 2 L's and 2 N's, -project.org. And they go to news, MP news on there, you'll see a link. I've also put a link in your chat here in case anybody wants to see it. And they can sign on. It is it's an open letter to the Secretary General.
Sounds good to me. I'm all in favor of it. So thank you both. This has certainly been touching on extraordinarily important issues. I hope time will show that everybody's been too pessimistic and that really there wasn't anything to worry about, and all these colored lights out behind Jerry are just Christmas tree lights, and we don't have to worry about anything. but I'm afraid we are not likely to reach that conclusion. Okay, thank you both. It's been fun, sort of. It's been important.